About 2 years ago, I was gifted the chance of a lifetime for Halloween. Instead of going to fake haunted houses that charge an arm and a leg, me and 3 friends pitched in on a house to stay at for the night. Not just any house, though, no. We booked the Villisca murder house because we had long since been fascinated by it. Mind you, this had been a dream of ours for years. When the time came for us to pack up and leave, we were nervous, but also thrilled. The whole drive there, we were chattering about what to expect, but I don't think we could have ever prepared for the reality of the situation. As we arrived, our moods shifted from excitement to sheer nervousness. Most of us held a minor belief in the paranormal, but we also had a sense that it was just a sham. People who ultimately got too worked up about an old house settling. If you've never read The Man from the Train, you should. It was the book that really pushed us to do this. Basically, it goes into several different axe murders spanning years and makes their connections. If the theory proves true, then it was the work of a serial killer who beat Bundy by far. Getting there, it was almost surreal. After we parked and got our overnight bag out, we headed to check in. The worker there gave us a brief rundown of the premises and the do's and don't list of the property before he left. Once that was done, the key was handed over and they scurried out. Alone in this eerie house, all of us just sat silently for a few seconds, taking it in. Finally, the silence was broken when we had just started chatting amongst ourselves. Most of it was figuring out the sleeping arrangements. It was settled that I would be sleeping in the littlest girl's room, the one that the infamous Bacon was found in. If you know the case, you know the one. Walking myself up there, it felt oppressive, like the weight of the world suddenly sat on my shoulders, and there was no escaping. No matter how hard I wanted to, I could have sworn tears were in my eyes. Either way, anxiety had bled into sheer sadness. It didn't matter where in the house we were. There was always a hint of sadness. It just seemed that the room I was in had it worse. By 6 p.m., we had a good idea of how the night was going to go. As we settled in with food and drink and a Netflix show on the laptop, the sun was also starting to completely fade. As we sat downstairs, things started to get strange. I mean, they were already strange, but it ramped up. We were sitting there in our own conversation when we heard something clamor from upstairs. It seemed like something had fallen off the wall or dresser. Something hit the ground. All of us looked at each other and up. We jumped and we tried to rationalize it. Walking up the steps, I saw that my purse had ended up on the floor, which made no sense. I had it in the middle of the bed before walking down the steps. We tried to rationalize it all, but nothing worked. In fact, as the night went on, that was the least of our concern. It just kept amping up. All back in the living room, the noises all continued, except that now it wasn't just clattering. Sitting together, we started to hear the pitter-patter of feet above us. Needless to say, none of us were ecstatic to go see what the noise was. I tried to ignore it to the best of my ability. It wasn't until 10 p.m. that we all started to get sleepy. However, due to the recent events, we weren't thrilled to sleep alone, so I took a friend with me. We both figured that none of us were actually going to sleep, but it still felt nice to have company. From upstairs, we settled in and just started to talk about life events. Just to feel more comfortable, I closed the door to the outside hall area. With the lights off and us talking, our room suddenly felt like it dropped 15 degrees. We were both shivering and teeth chattering. The oppressiveness doubled, and in a single second, both of us heard giggling. It wasn't like a distant noise either. It sounded like it was right in between my friend and me. If I didn't know better, I could have felt the breath in my ear. Both of us looked at each other and just shook our heads. I think we just didn't want to put into words what was happening right then. Still reeling from our run-in at the time, a scream burst from downstairs. A few seconds later, another one. Both of us upstairs took off down the steps, meeting our friends in the middle. They both looked paler than normal, and one of them had a red mark on her face. Their words came out in between their panting breaths. We decided we weren't going to split up anymore. That was it. We pulled together what looked like a fort in the living room, promising to clean it up in the morning. Sitting on the floor, none of us wanted to sleep. Instead, we listened to the silence. It was like we were braced for whatever was coming next. Shockingly, we thought it was over since there was a lull in whatever the heck was happening. We were wrong. It was just biding its time. It all kicked back up at 3 a.m. We had just let our guard down enough to potentially get some rest. But as I was right on the cusp of sleep, a noise jolted me back awake. It wasn't the pitter-patter of footsteps from early, but this time it sounded like work boots stomping up the steps, one by one. It was menacing. What made it worse was that it didn't stop on the steps. We followed the noise all the way on the ceiling above us. Then it stopped. We were still staring at the ceiling when it sounded like someone slammed something into the floor right above our heads. It was with enough force that we all moved out of habit. Taking in a deep breath, I decided that I'd rather just go look instead of not knowing. I tentatively took a few steps towards the staircase and braced myself. I'll never forget the next few moments of what happened. I was at the bottom of the stairs when I felt every hair on my body stand at attention. The mood went from oppressive to downright mean. I was so angry for no reason at all. I just wanted to hit things to do it. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my body. Then I felt a breeze right beside me, followed by the steps going up the stairs in front of me. But nothing was there. Standing there, I looked at my friends, and when I looked back, I saw a misty black figure at the top of the steps. It wasn't solid, but it was defined enough that I could make out the top portion of what appeared to be shoulders. Everything below that was just a blob of smoke-looking air. Rage continued to bubble up within me until it became so overwhelming that I had to physically remove myself from inside of the home. I forced myself outdoors, gulping in air. I didn't want to go back in and finish the night. But I knew my friends didn't want to waste money, so I sucked it up. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and I avoided the upstairs and the staircase entirely. I sent my friend to retrieve my things. Being there seemed to make me physically ill. After leaving, I haven't entertained the case since. Halloween has always been my favorite time of year and holiday. On top of being born in October, it was just something that I always found fun. One year, though, our fun turned into something more dangerous. My roommate and I decided it was a good time to go to a party that a friend from college was putting on. The catch was, this wasn't a house party. This party was being thrown in a cornfield. Talk about horror movies, right? Well, I had never been to a party that was set up like that, and honestly, I was intrigued. It was the highlight of our entire week. We took the time to go get a costume and spent time getting dressed up. By the time the party started, we were buzzing with excitement. On the drive there, we talked about all the typical things. Who would be there? What it might be like, the usual. Arriving at the site, though, was something else entirely. It was massive, and spotlights lit up only portions of the field. It felt like hundreds of people were crowded in this small circular cast of light. Walking in, red Solo cups were pushed into our hands, and we melted into throngs of bodies. Once we were there, things ramped up. Between friends from classes pulling us into their own conversations, or random drunken guys trying their hand at dancing. Things were going great for the first few hours. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the night and their drinks. Yet, as the night pushed on and people continued to indulge themselves with more alcohol, it started to spiral out of control. As people drank and drank, it started to get more rowdy. By the time 2 a.m. hit, everyone was scattering. Groups of friends were missing at least one of their own. I wasn't exempt. I was missing the friend I came with. It was when I was looking for her that I felt a pair of hands clamp down on my shoulder, squeezing it to a point that was physically painful. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was, but I did because I learned early on to not turn your back on predators. As I turned, I was face to face with Adam, my ex-boyfriend that was still upset that I ended our relationship nearly 2 months prior. I knew the face he was wearing. It was anger fueled by booze. Not wanting to be caught up in another fight, I went to navigate myself around him, bumping into his shoulder as I stormed past. I kept on walking without so much as a glance back. I kept walking through the groups of people looking for a skimpy SWAT uniform. Still, it was nowhere around. I was at the edge of the lighting when I heard her voice coming from further out in the fields. I felt a fleeting sense of panic knowing that the field was vast, and she'd drank more than I had, so I was more worried that she'd end up lost out there and disoriented. Sucking up my pride, I trudged into the darkness and called out to her in some drunken form of hide-and-seek almost. I did my best to listen to where it was coming from, but it seemed to be coming from all directions. I kept pushing forward, but I got distracted from a twig breaking behind me, followed by a rustle of debris from the ground. Before I could even turn around, I was hit by a sudden force that sent me reeling forward and onto the solid ground in front of me. I didn't even have time to catch myself, so I landed sprawled out in a starfish style. I felt those hands again, but this time they were pushing me down into the earth. I felt a rush of dizziness as I rolled over to look at Adam, who by now looked almost possessed. He was mumbling something that I couldn't understand. I went to speak, but his hand shushed me, and anger flared. Before he could even think, I hurled my knee straight up and into his crotch, sending him keeling to the side. Spit flew from his mouth as he let out a string of curses. Rushing to my feet, I went to run, but his hand shot out to grab my ankle. This time I stumbled but caught myself and managed to kick myself free and took off into the darkness. The initial stumble left me more disoriented than I imagined, and now I had no idea where I needed to turn to get back to the party. I remember turning into circles, trying to discern which way was the right way, but I still couldn't tell. I veered the way that seemed closer to the music and hoped for the best. I kept walking, but it became clear that nothing was there. I felt more panic rising mixed with the drinks I had. I called the friend I was originally searching for, but now she didn't even reply. I did hear my name though. It was just coming from the man I was trying to escape. I could hear the rustling coming closer each step. He was so mad. I could hear tremors in his voice. Not wanting to give my position away, I forced myself to be quiet until I trusted that he lost which way I went. When I heard the crunching disappearing, I let my breath out. Right as I was about to let my guard down, the crunching was right behind me once again. And as I was trying to take in where the noise was coming from, I felt something cold against my back. I heard Adam growl at me to walk, and knowing that he was used to getting his way, I did. The only thing that didn't sit right with me was that we were walking further into the nothingness, and his grip assured me that he wasn't going to let me out of his sight. As we kept going, I started to try to reason with him. I wanted to appeal to the sober Adam, the one that had a little bit of reason left. However, it wasn't working. Considering that I was lost either way, I decided to take the chances. Once I felt his hand loosen for a split second, I bolted around and took off in the opposite direction. I turned on my heels and ran back the opposite way. I felt the stalks of the field slapping against my face. I ignored it the best I could and just kept going. My lungs started to burn after a couple of minutes, but I kept pushing myself onward. I heard Adam behind me yelling my name, and I just kept going. Nearly tripping over my own feet, I finally started to be able to hear music. I kept going toward the sound, and after a burst of energy, I fell back into the party. Not even 2 seconds later, Adam fell out right on my heels. I ran towards a group of classmates, and the biggest guy must have noticed the wild look in my eyes. As Adam came up behind me, the guy stood up and inserted himself between us. The two men seemed to stand off against each other, and when Adam made a move towards me, I watched the man swing a mean right hook. Blood came out from Adam's nose, and I watched his entire body swivel nearly a complete turn. He managed to right himself before completely crumbling. As soon as he could, he ran like he was a football player and attempted to tackle him. Both of them went backwards, and it was then that I noticed the stranger pull something from his back pocket. The light caught a glint of what looked to be a pocket knife. I went to yell, but it seemed like my voice was frozen. I watched as the blade was lifted, but before it could come back, I saw as something came hurtling towards both men, striking the one holding the knife. He let out a howl before crumbling. It was only then that I noticed people around scattering and screaming cops. I watched as two men wearing uniforms tackled them both, and all four men seemed to tangle in a giant heap. More officers slowly arrived and started dragging them apart. The rest of us took the chance to run from the cops and went to find our way back to our respective vehicles. It was at the last minute that I found our car. I went to snatch the keys and threw myself inside the driver's side door. When I slammed the door shut and looked up into the rearview mirror, I almost had a heart attack at the sight behind me. It seemed my friend found her way back to the car and in a drunken stupor passed out in the back seat. When we made it back home, I helped her inside, and after that, we never went back to another field to party. I also took out a restraining order on my ex because being walked through a weird field by someone who hates me wasn't something I want to repeat again. When my husband and I indulged our oldest sons with a trip to Six Flags for Halloween, our youngest son threw a fit when he realized that we were hesitant to take him. To be fair, Six Flags is huge. The thought of taking a 6-year-old was daunting. Still, after talking it over, we decided that we would take him. I'd feel awful if I didn't give him the same fun opportunities that we were giving his brother. Besides, I wasn't a huge fan of rides, so I would be able to keep him company without missing much. The time we went was obviously for Six Flags Halloween festivities. Arriving at the hotel, We got ourselves settled in and everything taken care of for the first night. We turned in early. That way we would be ready to go the next day without lagging. We all woke up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so they say, knowing that the celebration wouldn't really kick off until that afternoon. I didn't bother to do more than a Halloween t-shirt. My husband added a cape, but we saved the full costumes for the kids. The boys went all out. The oldest went as Freddy Krueger, and the youngest as Darth Vader. We wound our way around the park for hours. The whole ordeal made me glad that I skipped an actual costume. It felt like I had been walking for 24 straight hours, and I'm sure the shirt I was wearing now had armpit stains. Despite my exhaustion, the boys still seemed to have ample amounts of energy. Looking back, I dealt with a lot of mom guilt over a period of time because the walking and humidity had turned me into a grump, but I forced myself to just grin and bear it. Since the sun had started to vanish by then, green and orange glow sticks lit up everywhere I looked. Kids and adults alike scurried all around us. Masks, capes, and brooms were plentiful as squeals rang out. All our stomachs had been growling, so we made a stop to grab some food, and when we were done, I told the boys I had to go to restroom. I double-checked with the youngest to see if he needed to go, but when he said no, I simply asked them to wait right there, and I would be right back. After no more than 6 or so minutes, I walked back out into the chaos. Looking around, the spot where we had just stood was now empty. I looked in both directions, but nothing. My heart was beating outside of my chest by then, and all I could hear was a whomp-type noise whooshing in my ears. I knew that I didn't have my phone, considering I told them to stand right there to wait, so that took away that option. I started to almost sprint ahead as I desperately wished for them to appear. Finally, at the far end of the way, standing in front of a wooden railing, I saw my husband. Running up to them, I was winded and furious. Of course, he looked aloof and didn't understand the problem, but after a minute of explaining, he was fine. Once my heart rate slowed, I asked where our youngest was because I wanted to take him on a ride that I knew he would be able to get on. That was when my oldest son and husband both looked right at me, and I knew something was desperately wrong. Their faces were devoid of color, and I swear you could hear a pin drop around us. It was like the outside world ceased to exist to me. My husband looked at me, and he pointed right at me and started to babble that he went with me. He watched my son walk after me when I'd already turned to head that way. My entire world stopped spinning. I felt nauseas, and the world around me started to spin. Without even asking, I took off back to the bathrooms and knocked everyone out of the way to get inside. When one woman tried to protest, she must have saw a glimpse of something in my eyes because she backed down quickly. I screamed his name repeatedly until I was satisfied that he wasn't there. Then I ran back out into the night. My husband had also set off looking and had managed to track down a security guard who was quickly talking into his walkie-talkie. I did my best to pay attention to his words, except I was too focused on every little kid that walked by. I was scanning for my son, and none of these kids seemed to fit the bill. Tears started to fall from my eyes, and my husband held on to me for dear life. The oldest son did his best to run ahead, taking my phone with him. The officer who was speaking stepped away to take a call on his phone, and when he returned, he looked even more solemn. I asked him what happened. Why did he look so defeated? He quietly relayed to us that a worker had saw a boy matching our son's description leaving the park with a woman. A woman that wasn't me. My heart stuttered. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that any mother would do. I screamed. The officer walked us to the side and advised us to go back to the front of the park, or even to our hotel, and they'd keep us in the loop. I didn't want to leave, though. I didn't feel like I could. I needed to find my son. I begged them to let me stay and search, but they didn't seem to want me anywhere near them, especially if they thought my son had gone out of the park. They all did what they had to do, and that made me return home and wait like every other missing kid's parent. I did as instructed, though, and I started to head out. But that was when something caught my attention. As I was leaving, I saw a couple holding the wrist of a little Darth Vader. The kid was crying. I don't know how to explain it, except a mother knows. But I set my sights on this family and followed. After a minute or two, they must have picked up on the fact that they were being followed. When one of them turned, their eyes sized me up, and the next thing I knew, they were all running. I was hustling to just keep up. I shoved others away as I struggled to keep my eyes on them. Then they turned a corner, and they were gone. I felt my heart drop, and as I was about to completely fall apart, I saw that same Darth Vader now running alone. I kept screaming my son's name, but I rationalized he was probably scared. Quickly, I saw the little kid vanish between a set of doors. I kept a close chase, but I knew that I would need help. I finally got it in the form of a lone security staffer. I pulled him and explained before we both took off through the double swinging doors. They slammed with a loud bang right behind us. Frustratingly enough, I was ordered to wait. The waiting seemed to take hours, but in reality, it was only minutes. I was chewing my nails when the security man returned with a crying, small little boy. My boy. He held on to me as if I was going to disappear right in front of him. The next few hours were all a blur of being reunited and listening to the awful realization that whoever those people were had seemingly picked my child up at random. He told them about me in the bathroom and they fed him some bogus story that they would help, but instead tried to walk away with him. They never were able to locate them either. That's the worst part. Needless to say, we were so happy to have him back, but now when we go places like that, we all go.